Príjemný dobrý deň, príjemné poludne vám prajem, dámy a páni. Moje meno je Samuel Krizuliak a rád by som vás privítal na ďalšom podujatí BHD Live. BHD Live je mestský akademický festival, ktorý sa deje ako sprievodné podujatie k 3. národnému pochodu za život. A na úvod mám pre vás niekoľko takých technických pokynov, aby sme vedeli, čo nás spolu za chvíľku čaká. Budeme mať za chvíľku prednášku, ktorá bude trvať zhruba 45 minút a potom, čo naša prednášajúca svoju prednášku predniesie, budete mať možnosť pýtať sa otázky buď prostredníctvom takého softvéru, ktorý sa volá SLOBODE, do ktorého sa môžete prihlásiť. Toto je prihlásenie na Wi-Fi a do toho SLOBODE sa môžete prihlásiť, to sa vám tam tiež ukáže týmto heslom BHD Live. Takisto budú medzi vami ľudia s mikrofónom, budete môcť pýtať sa otázku po slovensky alebo po anglicky aj ústne. Ak potrebujete preklad, táto prednáška bude po anglicky a vonku sú pripravené staničky, ktoré si môžete teraz vyzdvihnúť, aby ste sa vedeli dobre zladiť s našou speakerkou dnešnou. Na záver by som povedal už len jednu vec a to je, že naše podujatie sa koná zadarmo, nemusíte platiť na to, aby ste sem prišli, ale významne vás a prosím, aby ste možno zažili tú možnosť prispieť spolu k nákladom a k zneseniu nákladov celkového pochodu za život. Vonku po tomto podujatí v priebehu celého dňa budú dobrovoľníci s pokladničkami, takže pozbudzujeme vás k štedrosti. Dovolte mi teraz krátko predstaviť našu rečničku. Dnešným leitmotívom nášho rozprávania, našej prednášky bude ideologická kolonizácia Afriky. Súčasná postmoderná kultúra a so svojím ponímaním ľudskej sexuality, či už ide o široko rozšírené používanie antikoncepcie, širokú dostupnosť potratov alebo rôzne moderné verzie feministického hnutia, toto nie je niečo, čo je len fenomén do západnej kultúry. V posledných desiatkách rokov vidíme, ako sa táto postmoderná kultúra aj so svojím ponímaním ľudskej sexuality prenáša do rôznych iných častí sveta, ako je napríklad aj Afrika. A náš dnešný host je tým najpovolanejším človekom na to, aby nám rozprával, ako to vyzerá, keď sa myšlienky progresívne, postmoderné prenášajú pokutným spôsobom zo západu do krajín takého bohatého a rozmanitého pestrého kontinentu, ako je Afrika. Naša rečnička je tým najpovolanejším človekom, aby rozprávala o tejto téme. Pani Obianuju Ekeocha pochádza z Nigérie, je z rodiny zo 6 súrodencov a v súčasnosti pracuje ako biomedicínska vedkyňa v jednej nemocnici v Spojenom kráľovstve. Popri tom je zakladateľkou ľudskoprávnej organizácie Culture of Life Africa, kultúra života v Afrike, a je jedným z najznámejších pro-life hlasov na celom africkom kontinente a dovolím si povedať, že už aj na celom svete. Keď som sa s ňou pred chvíľkou rozprávala, na koľkých všetkých pódiách rozprávala o kultúre života, tak mi povedala, že rozprávala v 24 krajinách, v 14 krajinách, teda v 14 pochodoch za život sa zúčastnila v 9 krajinách a na 10 rôznych pochodoch za život aj rozprávala na hlavnom pódiu. Takisto zajtra budete mať možnosť si vypočuť na hlavnom pódiu pochodu za život. Čo ešte povedať na záver? Koľko toho pani Obianuju Ekeocha o kultúre života vie a koľko už preto spravila, to nám povie v dnešnej prednáške. Ale jedna taká obzvlášť zaujímavá záľuba, ktorú má pri svojej angažovanosti v otázkach kultúry života, je písať listy tým najmocnejším ľuďom tohto sveta, ktorí občas broja proti kultúre života. A také dva listy, ktoré napísala len v poslednom čase otvorené verejné, boli napríklad prezidentovi Spojených štátov Barackovi Obamovi v roku 2013 pri jeho návšteve Senegalu, keď sa pokúšal niektoré prvky modernej a progresívnej alebo postmodernej ideológie preniesť do Afriky. Alebo takisto, pokiaľ išlo o Melindu Gatesovú, ktorá je manželka bilionára Billa Gatesa, pri ich programe nadácie rodiny Gatesovcov, ako rozšíriť používanie antikoncepcie v Afrike. Takže je mi veľkou cťou, že dneska môžeme s nami privítať takú odvážnu a múdru ženu, ako je pani Ekeocha. A ja by som ju teraz pozval na naše pódium a poprosím, aby sme ju privítali jedným veľkým potleskom. Ďakujem pekne.
To be back in Bratislava. I think I was here back in April of this year, and I was hoping to get invited back. I was almost begging to come back. So I was told about the March for Life at the time, and I had some other program, I think on Monday, that would have made it impossible for me to come, and I went around trying to cancel because I love Bratislava so much. And I wanted to go to the shopping mall, to be honest, because the last time I didn't get a chance to go to the shopping mall. So, but other than that, I'm really happy to be here. There are lots of young people here today. So I will be speaking about a little bit slightly different than what I spoke about the last time, but from an African perspective, which is hypersexualization of youth and the rising tide of radical feminism in Africa. So here is the full disclosure, which I always tell people, because when I go to make a presentation, especially in places where there may be hostile audience, but I know you're not hostile today, and I know you will be merciful to me. I always give a full disclosure because I speak about Africa normally, and people will come to me and say, oh, Africa is not a country. Africa is not a country. I know, I am African, okay? So this is my full disclosure. I will always make it my first point of call, just to get everyone comfortable. I do understand, and I know that most people do understand that Africa is a continent with about 55 countries. It's a home to about 1 billion people, and there are almost 3,000 native languages that are spoken on the continent of Africa. There are thousands of tribes and ethnic groups. I am from the Igbo tribe, so I'm from the southeastern part of Nigeria, so mine is only one of the many, many tribes and ethnic groups in Africa. There are many creeds professed, and therefore there is not one African culture. There's not just one single African culture. However, I will still speak about Africa as one body, because there are really some common threads that run through the different cultures and customs of the African people. So there are traditions and cultures that value the sanctity of the human life from the womb. So from, this is whether you are in Nigeria or whether you're in Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania, you will find that the tribes and the cultures and the customs of the people, what is the default position is to respect human life from the womb. They elevate motherhood. They recognize the dignity of human sexuality. And people always like to say, kind of emphasize the importance of especially young people, respecting sex and intimacy and reserving it for commitment and marriage. Okay, this is the default position. It's not your business. It's not. This is in the African parent would slap you on the head and say it's my business. Yeah. So the parents are always have that upper hand. They emphasize responsibility, the approach of responsibility with regards to sex and intimacy. And I haven't lived in Europe for the last, let's say the last 13 years. What I've noticed is that the approach in Europe is about rights. It's about your sexual rights, your rights to sexual pleasure, your right. Nobody has a business to ask you what, how many people, when, how. But in Africa, it's slightly different. It's more about responsibilities, at least as far as the general society is concerned. And so people promote and encourage marriage and commitment, okay? And respect, there is a lot of respect for the rights of parents with regards to raising children. So they place family as well, right at the center of society. Okay, so now, with all of these things I've just listed, this is the problem now, because it's so, well, in many ways it's different than what is the prevalent culture in a lot of the Western countries now. So when people who are coming from the West get to Africa, these cultures and traditions that highlight all of these values then become a stumbling block to them. There is no way they can get past some of these things in order to push their agenda, in order to push certain ideas and ideals, because then what the African person will ask you, what about my parents? Or they would say, oh, what about our tradition of men having to go to the families to ask for a girl's hand in marriage? There are all these questions and stumbling blocks. So this is then what happens. because they have a real intention to push for a radical cultural shift in Africa, they target two groups of people, two very important groups of people, the youth and the women. All right, so these are the targets. Because if there is always that possibility that, somebody would say, well, in my tradition, the value of human life starts from the womb. The child, we know, by the Igbo tradition, that the baby in the womb is alive, the baby in the womb should be protected, the baby in the womb carries the bloodline of the family. So I will always complain if someone tries to get the idea of abortion to me. And I am a woman, right? So I'm the first person they would start with, as well as the young person, because the youth will also ask, what about my parents? What about the fact that my parents have the rights over me? So these are the two groups that have now been highly targeted by people who are coming for a radical cultural shift. So this is how they are doing it. There is a huge effort for re-education of the African youth. The last time I came here, I was speaking about this idea of neocolonialism. I talked a lot about aid, but it was all kind of general, right? I was explaining how Western countries make some budget for Africa, and they call it humanitarian aid, and they send it to Africa, but then I didn't have the time or the opportunity to then show you exactly when that money comes into the African communities, how it is then dispersed. Yeah? When the euros come and the pounds and the dollars, how is it played out in an African town, in an African city, or an African village for that matter? One of the ways that the money goes into creating this cultural shift is by the re-education of our youth. So I'll show you mostly some pictures. So this is a tweet that was put out a while ago by this lady who was working for the American Peace Corps. And she, by all intentions and purposes, one would say somebody who is working for the American Peace Corps in an African country, she was living in some village in Burkina Faso. She was meant to be teaching people about civic society. She was meant to be teaching people, survival skills. She was meant to be teaching even language, the English language. I mean, there were so many things this American woman could have done in a Burkina Faso, in her Burkina Faso mission as an American Peace Corps person. But then she tweeted this, and she says that Marie Stopes, for those who don't know Marie Stopes is a British abortion organization that has done so much damage in Africa because they go to African countries and they are trying to spread the idea of abortion through the different African countries, and they get a lot of funding from Western countries as well. So she says that Marie Stopes provided examples of available contraception to show students like the implant. So she's showing some young girls, okay? So I'm looking at this picture and I'm thinking, wow, these are like 13-year-olds or even 12-year-olds. These are really, really young girls. And so she's in an African village and everyone thinks, oh, American Peace Corps, it's great charity work. But then she's talking about teaching these little children, obviously it's without their parents, about contraception, and she's doing it with Marie Stopes, and they are having a great time doing it. Now, this is another project that is being promoted by the United Nations. It's called Condomize Project. The Condomize Project, from the name, you can tell it's about promoting condoms in different countries, particularly African countries. So the project is actually hosted by UNFPA. You might be able to see their logo right at the top there, the top right. UNFPA stands for the United Nations Population Fund, which is an agency within the United Nations that deal with population. Okay, so this is the Condomize project that they had in one country. Okay, so I will show you a little bit more about Condomize in a few slides. But then there is also a lot of disregard for African parents. That's what it means. that if somebody can be tweeting from an African school in a village in Burkina Faso and saying, oh, we're having such a great time teaching children about contraception, that means that definitely they have not contacted the African parents, but there is even a lot more of that. This was a project, it's written in French, that was done in Togo, Lomé, actually it's been done in Lomé, Togo, but it's been done in several African cities and several African countries. And it's the My Body, My Right campaign, which is hosted by Amnesty International. Some of you may have heard of Amnesty International because they always tend to insert themselves into discussions in various countries, especially when abortion is concerned. They were very much involved in pushing for abortion in Ireland the last couple of years until, of course, everybody knows that abortion was finally legalized in Ireland. So Amnesty International is not only doing their work in countries like Ireland, they were in Togo and they were doing this My Body, My Right campaign. C'est votre corps, connaissez vos droits. So this little child, well, there are actually many children there, but the one who is holding up this sign for this campaign in this school, because they're all in school uniform, you can see this child is definitely a primary school child. So these are literally children, even younger than the girls I just showed now. Now the disturbing thing is that when you look closer and read all the things on the sign, because it looks kind of harmless, and you can see here, there is a little pen, you can see all the crafty things. I'll show you here if I can. That's a pen, so it looks like it's a school thing. So obviously, it's targeting students. You can see it's very much deceptive because it looks like an educational material, but I'll show you what is written on this poster. So it says here in number 3, so the very third thing that they're asking for in this poster, décider si je veux et quand avoir un enfant. To decide if I want and when to have a child. But that's a child. This is a child holding up an abortion poster of one of the things that is being asked for in this campaign is the right to abortion. But the child is maybe 7 or 8 years old. Again, you can see that the African parent is at home, whereas in the daytime, some Western person from Amnesty International walks into the school, and then because they have a lot of money, the school allows them access to the children. Here is another thing. Oh, all right. For those who were sleeping, when you wake up, nothing happened. So I knew this was going to happen to me today, but I thought it was going to be the mic. It had been long coming. Okay, so the Condomize project, but it was good. Just in case I was getting boring back then, Lisa, thank you. So, but anyway, this is the Condomize project, another part of the Condomize project. Which again, as I said before, it's a United Nations Population Fund project. So it says here, it's age-appropriate information is a must, and it's one thing young minds like these require to grow up in the right path. Now, when you read the message, you actually don't think about it. This is a condom ad, mind you. This is a United Nations condom ad. And when I say condom ad, it's not just a harmless, let's advertise condoms so that people will be safe. It is a huge, in one particular year, Condomize Project claimed that about 1 billion condoms with a B, 1 billion condoms were brought into the African continent. So this is a huge flooding of the African continent. Now, but look at the picture. That picture is a little bit difficult to see. They are all wearing little face caps that is written Condomize. All right? But I should show you a baby, probably 3 years old. He's wearing a condom face cap by the United Nations. So there is definitely something going on in Africa. It is a lack of respect for the African parent. Now, the false advertising and the empty promises is another thing that is going on as far as African youth are concerned. They come in and they are with their highly sexualized messages. And this is another campaign that was being hosted by the United Nations Population Fund. You can see their logo, and IPPF, which stands for the International Planned Parenthood Federation. So this is for Africa region. And it looks like a necktie for men, but when you look into it very closely, there are messages and words that are written. So it's like a word cloud that is in the shape of a tie. So it looks really nice and trendy and cool, and they put this out in different places on the social media and all whatnot. But the words are a little bit difficult to see, so I have decided to write out the words so that you can see how the messaging and the kind of promises they are making to the African youth, you would see exactly what they're saying. So the United Nations and the IPPF people are saying that you can drive your own car, which I don't know how you all in Slovakia feel about driving your own car when you're a young person, but in Africa, it's a real dream, okay? Because even some adults who have families and all that don't even have cars in some places, but they're promising the African youth, you can drive your own car. That is the message, the first message. You can own your own house, another dream. You can have the money and happiness you want. You can make your dreams come true. You can be your own man. You can make your own rules. So now this is where the promise then catches on the product that all of these things that you're promising, where will I sign? If somebody comes to me and says, I want, you can get your car, get your house, I just say, where will I sign? But then this is exactly what they have to do. You be the man that uses condoms all the time. Absolutely no responsibility there. Remember when I told you about the African culture and the traditions and the point that sex is always tied to some sort of responsibility. But here, the United Nations comes to Africa and they tie sex more to, nothing but rights. And then they make a lot of promises that come from it. You can support your woman to take the pill, injection, implant, loop, to not have a child you are not ready for and you don't want. So this is the United Nations, and when they are in Western countries, they are all nice and good, and it's the UN, and they are the height of all moral institutes, and they are the center of morality. But when they come to Africa, they are pushing for something slightly different. So we'll go to the women's movement. I've talked about how the young people are being targeted. Of course, in the West, I think this has already been sold and bought by those who want to buy it years ago. But they are now turning to like a new location, and they are going, they're going at various other populations. So the women's movement, before I talk about the women's movement and the feminist movement, I would want to say that I, as an African woman, born and raised and educated in Africa, I do know definitely that there are various things that put women at disadvantage. I will be the first to say it. I'm not being naive here. So there are a handful of practices, and so there is a need for some kind of effort, actually a concerted effort needed to stop these handful of practices that still affect, up to today, some women, not all, but some women in some African societies. So some of the harmful practices are female genital mutilation, and a lot of people may have heard about it, or now it's coming in with a lot of immigration anyway. It is now something of concern, even in some Western countries. Child marriage, also another big issue, okay? In some countries more than the others, but definitely happening. There is a disadvantage of the African girl child, okay? The disadvantaged African girl child, and the fact that there is a preference for male children. So I'll just say something a little bit off of what I've written here, that in societies where abortion is legalized, not African countries, but in Western countries, you find that among these immigrant communities, now this preference for male children finds its real power because there is the right to abortion, and so they are then having scans, finding out it's a baby girl, aborting that baby girl, all done legally, okay? So, but as of now, we don't have legal abortion in Africa, so that's not an issue. People are not really scanning to find out the sex of their babies unless you have a lot of money. So, but naturally, in a lot of the African cultures, the baby boy is preferred, okay? My mother, just something just a little digression. I think my mother will be upset for me sharing this here, so I don't know when you record it, I just try and make sure she doesn't see the video, but my mother, when she got married to my dad back in the 60s, my grandmother had a lot of sons, and there is a sort of a superstitious belief among my people that if you have a lot of girl, your children will have boy. So it goes from one generation to the next. So my grandmother had 6 boys, okay, 6 sons and 1 daughter. Then my mother marries my father and comes in, and she has a baby girl in 1965, a baby boy in a baby girl in 1967, another baby girl in 1969. So 3 girls. And she packed all her things and told my grandmother, I'm leaving. I am leaving because I'm never going to have sons. So I cannot stay in this marriage because you've had all the sons there are to be had in this family. So my grandmother had to take her to her mother, and they were begging her, don't go, just try again. So then my mom came back, and she had a baby boy, and everybody was happy. 3 boys, 3 girls. Then I came a lot after that. But there is a real preference for the male child, because even the educated, you find that there is a lot of anxiety when you're having girls. But this is one real disadvantage, actually, within the African cultures. So we need something to be done, okay? Then there's also like something like maltreatment of the widows and how people are able to inherit money when their husbands die. In some cases as well, in some societies, the system is not tight enough to protect widows. Domestic violence, which is not only the African problem, everybody knows there's domestic violence where, even in more advanced societies, of course, because when there is 2 people living together and one is much physically stronger, it takes a lot of moral courage and moral strength to not abuse. Okay, so it's not. I think this is a global issue. So, and I dare say that another harmful practice that affects women, whether in Africa or anywhere else, is abortion. It is abortion, and all the related abuse that comes with abortion. Because normally, when you question a lot of the women who are coming through to abortion clinics, they would tell you something like, my boyfriend says he's not ready for a child, or he wants to leave me, and he's not there's a lot of that. So abortion is also another harmful practice. So when there are these harmful practices and other things that affect women, yes, so we do need a women's movement. And to be honest with you, growing up in Africa, I grew up knowing that there was a strong women's movement. Note that I say women's movement and not the feminist movement, because they are completely different. So when I was growing up, there were lots of women who were part of like the Women Association of Teachers, the Women Association of Traders, the Women Association of Doctors. We love to find sisterhood, and women usually come together and they are kind of celebrating one another and trying to solve problems within those kinds of women's groups. And I think it's a fantastic thing, because a lot of, in the African context, the African woman loves being a woman, okay? So I love being a woman, but I like men, all right? So it's not about hating men. It's not about trying to beat down men or trying to reduce them from being like the heads of the families. This is about just appreciating the fact of being a woman who is maybe in a professional life or not, but also a woman who is a mother. We celebrate the possibilities of motherhood, but also the fact that you are the heart of the family. As the mother, you are the heart of the family. So we celebrate all of that, and that's what the women's movement in Africa has been about for many, many years. But then there's something new that is coming to our continent, because in the way the women's movement is, it is not really helping those who want to create or bring about a cultural shift, because the African women just love being wives and mothers, okay? So we now have a new feminism in Africa. That is the only solution for people who come to bring cultural shift to us. This is a charter that was put together a couple of years ago. It's the Charter of Feminist Principles for African Feminists. So when I saw this, I thought to myself, I wonder what this is. So I read this. I think it's about a 16-page document. And part of what is about dismantling the patriarchy, as they put it. Then they said that they're opposing the subversion and or hijacking of autonomous feminist spaces to serve right-wing conservative agendas. These are exact words from a charter for African feminists. So again, this kind of struck me as very odd and strange. They also say they want a freedom of choice and autonomy regarding bodily integrity, including reproductive rights, including abortion. So now, in other words, these words didn't sound African to me. I don't know if they sound African to you, but you must surely identify more with these than myself, because when I read it, I felt it was strange. This is Western feminism. But what they did was that these Western feminists came to a bunch of African women and said to them, you form an African feminism, and we'll take these words, okay? Take our charter of our principles and pass it as the charter of the African women feminists or whatever, all right? So, it was hosted. This entire thing, this whole African feminism thing, is being hosted by this group called the African Women's Development Fund. AWDF is one of the biggest, let's just say biggest feminist groups in Africa across various nations, okay? AWDF. Now let's go to AWDF and follow the money. Why do they even exist, these African feminists? Let's follow the money. So I went to look for the donor list, because that's a good place to start. All right? These are the people who are giving them money. The Gates Foundation was on the list. The Open Society Foundation, which is Judge Soros, okay? Ford Foundation, Global Fund for Women, Mama Cash, Match International Women's Fund Canada, Women's Foundation from Minnesota, that's not Africa at all. Women's Funding Network, USA, that's not Africa. Department for International Development, which is the British government's arm for aid, so again, a British entity. The Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, NORAD. UN Women, which is another agency within the UN, the Dutch MDG3, which is, of course, I think the Dutch version of the DFID. And this organization is raising from these Western donors about $4 million a year. That is more than, lots and lots of African groups put together. Nobody raises $4 million in Africa for one organization, but this organization does, all right? And then when they got the money, yes, they are ready to talk about patriarchy and talk about things that sound Western, like bodily autonomy, all right? And conservative groups, ending all conservative groups and right-wing. We don't have right-wing in Africa. Everybody is kind of conservative anyway. So it's a very strange thing, but this is what is going on. There's a lot of importation of feminism, what one could actually call importation of feminism. Now, to prove that this is what the new thing that the Canadian government has decided they're going to do through their foreign aid, they said that they want to promote feminism in Africa, and they want to promote feminist policies I don't understand or I don't know what feminist policies is, but that is what the Trudeau administration says they are now going to promote, and where they're going to put a lot of money. They went in, they changed a lot of things within what they had as the maternal newborn child health initiative, which was a great initiative that Canada was doing all the time a couple of years before Trudeau came in. And they have added abortion to that, they have added population control to that, they've added comprehensive sexuality education to that. So a lot of Canadian money was now to go in through the maternal and newborn and child health to like all of these things. Yes, I don't know what they have to do with child health, but I don't know, comprehensive sexuality education is ridiculous. So in 2007, the Canadian government laced our food with ideology. So it's like poisoning one's food, and I'll show you what I mean. So the Canadian government, this is from their government website, and on something that they had, a plan that they had put out, which was entitled Canada's Leadership on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. So the Canada gave money to Ethiopia through UNICEF. Okay, so UNICEF was the one that disbursed the money, but the money originally came from Canada. It was $15 million given from the period of 2017 to 2022, so a series of projects. Now, it's a lot of fine prints and very difficult to read, but I saw something that really shocked me, and I want to share that with you. Is the part that I circled in red, so I put it out so that everybody can read it, all right? So what the Canadian government says that they are going to do in this project, this $15 million project, is they are going to be providing youth-friendly sexual and reproductive health and rights, that's the SRHR services, including family planning and nutritional services, that is food. Nutritional services within health systems, within schools and communities to reach in school and out of school adolescent girls. So their real target in this food project is adolescent girls. So in other words, what the Canadian government is wanting to do is that they are going to, or they are offering the Ethiopians a food project, a nutritional service that has in it family planning and SRHR services. Are targeting the African child, essentially, the African girl child. So this is where a lot of the Western countries stand. Sometimes it's not very easy to be able to unpack their project like this, but fortunately I was able to see this on one of their government websites, but a lot of the other countries are doing very similar things. It's not just Canada. All of them are doing the same things. So the landscape for legal abortion, since we're all here for the March for Life eventually, is to show you what is going on. A lot of the African countries don't have legal abortion. If people are wondering, there are 4 countries that have abortion on demand in Africa, and that's South Africa, Tunisia, Cape Verde, Mozambique. So these 4 countries have legalized abortion on demand in the last 20, 30 years. So, public perception of abortion in Africa, though, because every time I talk about abortion in Africa, people say to me, well, that's good enough, you're just guessing, right? If you don't like abortion, maybe that's why you're saying that. But I want to show you the poll that was conducted by Pew Research in 2014, and in South Africa, where there is legal abortion, about 61% of the people that were questioned said that abortion was morally unacceptable to them. In Nigeria, my country, 80% of people questioned said abortion was morally unacceptable. Kenya is 82%, Uganda was 88%, and Ghana was 92% of the population. So Africa is a really, really pro-life territory. And yet, it is not stopping those who are pushing through feminism, those who are pushing through the young people. It's not really stopping them. So the Maputo Protocol is just the last bit of this presentation that I want to present. And I apologize in advance because the Maputo Protocol is a little bit of It's not an academic concept, but it's a little bit of a complicated thing that happened with our African Union, but I still think that it's important for people to kind of know it, and also maybe in conversation, if somebody ever brought up the Maputo Protocol, you can also just kind of slap back and say, I know what the Maputo Protocol is. So here is what the Maputo Protocol looks like. It is actually in full the protocol of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. So it was meant to be really for women's rights, so to say, in Africa, across the various African countries, and we all just call it the Maputo Protocol. I think because the first name is too long, so nobody can actually learn the protocol of the African Charter for Human and People's Rights on women's. No, we just call it the Maputo Protocol. All right? So the Maputo Protocol says, initially from the get-go, says it was going to be guaranteeing comprehensive rights to women, including the rights to take part in political process, social and political equality with men, so that women can actually go in and become, and actually vie for elections like men. It was meant to be about ending female genital mutilation. So the Maputo Protocol originally was meant to be a good thing. However, there was also this part, okay, improved autonomy in women's reproductive health decisions, which was a little bit vague, but you would see why eventually it wasn't vague at all. They had a whole intention with the Maputo Protocol. So this was passed at the AU level, the African Union level, which brought together almost like an equivalent of your EU, which brings together African countries. So the Trojan horse within this document, the Maputo Protocol, is the Article 14. If you don't remember anything else, forget everything else. Just know that the problem came in the Article 14. All right, so it says that it's about health and reproductive rights, and it's all of that. I don't know if you can read it. Okay, don't worry, you're not meant to read it. The problem came in the section 2C, all right? And because I like you all and I don't want you straining, that's it. All right? Okay. No, you weren't going to read all of that. So it's about various things. But these 40 words, these are 40 words. These 40 words is exactly what the Western culture shifts people, the warriors who are coming to Africa, they put this in here. And I will tell you why we know that. All right. So this is the part of the Maputo Protocol 2C. It was meant to be about ending female genital mutilation and all of that. But then it says here, protect the reproductive rights of women by authorizing medical abortion. Mind you, abortion is not legal in most of 80% of African countries. But it says here they want it by authorizing medical abortion in cases of sexual assault, rape, incest, and where the continued pregnancy endangers the mental and physical health, again another vague clause, of the mother or the life of the mother or the fetus. Already, many of the African countries anyway have an exception for the life of the mother, all right? So the issue was in the mental and physical health of the mother, which can be anything. Now, I said it was put in here in our African document by a Western organization. It was actually put in by this organization called Equality Now, or they were the ones that actually lobbied for it. Whether they drafted it or not, I don't know. But they lobbied for it. They had events around these 40 words during the time the Maputo Protocol was coming to the African Union. Equality Now is an American organization with the headquarters in New York. All right? So this was all a real project to bring abortion to African countries. And yet, with all of these things that I have explained now, we still keep hearing, what I still keep hearing, going through different African countries, speaking to various women wherever I go, is the persistent voices of the African women, saying the same things. They are saying no to abortion all the time. Every time I speak to them, these were some women that we saw in Sierra Leone when people were trying to push for abortion in Sierra Leone. The woman there is the woman I took her picture during the March for Life. That was the March for Life in Accra, Ghana. when I went for the March for Life. This is another person from the March for Life in Douala, Cameroon, when I attended the March for Life there. Again, it's very clear, no matter the country, no matter the language they're speaking, they are saying no to abortion. This was in Nigeria, in Abuja, Nigeria, my own country. Abortion hurts women and kills babies. These are the persistent voices of the African women. And yet, the wealthy Western warriors who are coming with an ideal of cultural shift are still pushing. They are pushing, particularly against these African women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uju, for your wonderful and inspiring talk, for explaining us the landscape of what fighting for a cultural life looks like in Africa these days. And I'm sure in our audience many people will be sympathetic to many of the things that you say, but I would like to perhaps press or ask just one question, so to speak, critically. In the first part of your talk, you spoke about the sexualization of youth, largely through the spreading and free extending the access to contraception. Mostly you spoke a lot about condoms. And you have kind of described in the discussion as a kind of strong contrast between what the African youth thinks, or the African parents think about contraception and condoms, and in contrast the Western culture and their approach. And perhaps it's offending already that the Western countries are pushing their views on contraception to Africa, and there's this striking contrast. But what are the kind of more in detail, if you were to expand, what are actually the harmful effects of contraception? I know that you write a little bit more about this in your book. Is it just the contrast, the cultural contrast, and the arrogance and ignorance of the Western countries that annoys you? Or is it also the actual impact that contraception can have on children and African communities? If you could expand a little bit on that.
Sure, of course. That's a fantastic question, because I have dealt expansively on both sides. So yes, there is the issue that everyone, even here, should know that it is an embarrassing thing for a neighbor to knock on your door and give your son a condom. No matter what you feel about condoms, it is not for your neighbor to do, right? So it doesn't matter how liberal you are or how much in support of these things, but is it the place or the position or the duty of the Western nations to come into Africa and offer our children these things without a parental knowledge even? I think no. And most people would, if you are a person of goodwill, you will also see that there is no dignity in the African person who is having their contraception provided from somebody from the outside. All right? So this is even without touching the issue of contraception, but it is the fact that the moment somebody is bringing contraception and condoms into the lives of another person, they're already kind of inserting themselves into sexual intimacies of people. So it's whether they are even married couples or whatever, should the Western nations be the third person in the bedroom of African couples? I think not. It is a horrible embarrassment. But that aside, the issue of contraception and the possible harms of which I have talked a lot about in the past and written about as well, we are seeing that a lot of the African countries, especially like in more rural parts, and even in the cities for that matter, we are not set up in such a way to handle vast numbers of complications that arise with contraception, especially hormonal contraceptives. So I live in England. In the last 13 years I have lived in England. I've worked in the healthcare system in England. So we know for sure, even though it happens somewhat silently, there are complications that arise all the time for women with hormonal contraceptives. People go quietly to their doctors and they say the implant that was given to me last week is causing me problems. It is happening within the NHS system, our National Health Services in the UK. It's happening every single day. That the NHS is spending a lot of money trying to remove contraceptives, replace it or whatever, or assessing women, because sometimes those side effects are so dangerous that it needs immediate medical attention. Now think about the woman in a farm in Kenya. She doesn't, you give her this IUD or implant, who will she go to? How is she can't go to the NHS. If she falls and collapses because she got some sort of clot or some kind of very dangerous or very serious medical side effect, who is going to call 999? Or, who is going to call 911, like the Americans would say, right? So in the UK we have 911. Who's going to dial for the ambulance? There is no ambulance to take her. So we have found cases where, because somebody came from the West and gave a free contraceptives, hormonal contraceptives to children, then they go back after 2 or 3 days, they have problems, they either end up dead in some cases, or the parents just spend a lifetime having to suffer that. Meanwhile, the person who gave the contraceptives have left and they haven't looked back and they haven't asked any other further questions. So that has also happened. But we are not seeing people suing these pharmaceutical companies or the people who give the contraceptives. Again, we can't have recourse to the judicial system. So our system is just not set up for it.
I see. So you say that the system is not ready for it, and the many side effects that wide use of contraception perhaps brings to its users, there's no way how to kind of mitigate those effects. But perhaps what some of the Western aid agencies would say is that there are some significant specific goals that we can achieve by spreading the use of contraception. For example, the issue of HIV or AIDS being as widespread. Many people would argue that the one way how we can successfully reduce the spread of AIDS in many African countries is actually teaching people how to use contraception, especially condoms. You discussed that a little bit in your book. What do you think about that argument?
Yeah, but the data actually doesn't support that. They like to say that, but then we point to the one single African country where there has been a huge and very clear, remarkable fall in the spread of HIV/AIDS, and that is the situation of Uganda. So Uganda turned up in the 80s, late 80s. They were at something like 30% of adult population were affected by HIV. They were infected by HIV. So there were people dying. This was a massive thing. 30% is like 3 in every 10 human beings you see on the street who are adults are actually affected by this disease. So this was a crisis for the country. The Western countries came in exactly with some of the things you said now. They said to the president, there is just one way to do this. Let's quickly teach everybody how to use condoms. Let's make it readily available everywhere. And HIV would be a thing of the past. The president, not only Uganda, they promoted this at the same time to various African countries. Botswana, in the southern region of Africa, they had Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho. So there were these countries that, UNAIDS is the agency in the United Nations that deals with HIV prevention and the fight against HIV. They came in and they were all promoting their condoms, the Condomize Project. So the president of Uganda takes a look at the condom and just says, this idea is it's really not flying with me. I don't think it's a good idea. It just looks like such a serious disease that is killing people, incurable as we knew it at the time. Then how are you going to protect us with this latex? He called it a rubber. He says the rubber cannot protect us. So he and the team around him, they formed a commission on HIV/AIDS, and they decided on this approach of ABC, so abstinence being the first, being faithful, and for populations like sex workers and things who couldn't do any of the two, then they promoted condoms. So that was a very small part of the population, but everybody else, it was about abstinence, it was about chastity, it was about being faithful to one's partner and just having one partner. When people were going around cheating and such, they called it a zero grazing project. So this was a huge campaign all over Uganda. There were billboards, beautiful billboards about this campaign. and within a short space of time. So all of their campaigns started, I think, in the early 90s, and I mean, by the mid-90s, early 2000s, you had a huge fall, the most remarkable, something like 70% fall. So this is where it has been proven the technique that works. And meanwhile, all the other countries that I mentioned, South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, where condoms came in, where you will find, even in a South African toilet, I went into a South African toilet at the airport, and there were condoms for free that I could just pick, and you know, if I wanted, I could have picked it and sold it, but I didn't. Anyway, no, it was just there, just like that. But anyway, these countries have not, I mean, everything that has happened, there has been nothing radical, there has been no real shift.
And why has the government program in Uganda, has it been stopped or is it still in place? Can they still rear, so to speak, the benefits, the fruits of that policy that they pursued, you said, in the 1980s?
Yeah, so they did it for about 10 years, and then there was such a pushback from Western agencies, and so much money infusion, so they just kept pushing and throwing condoms at the country, and eventually the president sort of kind of, I'd say, abandoned the project, so it's no longer the thing, right? So there was then, again, an increase in HIV, not as much as before, but there was a visible rise in HIV, and it just, it also kind of shows how powerful the West can be and how persistent the Western agencies can be against African players.
But I'm thinking, just to clarify the kind of policy, so the argument is that if you spread condoms to fight HIV, it actually doesn't teach people to be chaste, which is the one way how to prevent the spreading of sexual diseases, yeah. The one way how to actually teach them to deal with the diseases, to teach them to chastity and to monogamy.
Yes.
Is that the argument?
That is monogamy and faithfulness. So it's, the thing is with condom promotion, there is only one, because it's a product, there's only one way to promote condoms. It's not like, you know, it's not like an easy product. You have to sexualize it. So when they come to African nations to do these raves that I put up, some of the pictures were so bad, of course I couldn't share those pictures here, but people are doing parties and they are close to naked and they are promoting condom. That's the way to promote condom. They bring sex workers in and they do raves and parties. So it's the condom, by the nature of what it is, to promote it on a large scale, you have to come with a very sexual message. So it has the opposite effect.
Maybe we can look at some of the questions that we have on slide available from our audience. We encourage you all to ask more questions. We also have some assistants downstairs. You can ask a question in person as well. Let me see. There's the first question that we have available is, I'll read it out for all of us. What do you think is behind the efforts to introduce the abortion rights and sexual education from West into Africa? Is it financial interests or is it a matter of spreading ideology? I would perhaps expand it a little bit. We've just spoken about condoms. I mean, there must be pharmaceutical companies which are making these products, and there must be providers who are offering abortion. We know that Planned Parenthood in the United States it's a business model for these organizations, besides the old moral and legal arguments. I was wondering if you can answer this question, but also I wonder if you ever came across a kind of backlash against your activities. There must be this huge financial interest behind it. Do these guys ever get in touch with you and say, hold on, Uju, you are trying to cross our business here and you shouldn't be doing that?
Right, so yes, it's a whole financial interest. Whether they have fought me directly, no, they haven't fought me directly, but I have met people who have been part of these organizations, and whenever they come out, they always tell me, we hated your work. So every time, I tell you, in Nigeria, there's an organization called IPAS, which is an American organization not many people know about, but in Africa they're well known because even though they don't perform abortions, but they exist only to promote and lobby for abortion. So it's kind of a lobbying organization, and they lobby African parliaments. Now IPAS knows me so well that anytime, because I live in England, anytime I'm coming to Nigeria, they always try to send someone over to that event to listen and record and know what I'm doing and what the strategy is. To the point that about a year ago, I was invited for a conference like this in Nigeria, It was clashing with another event. I couldn't go, but I promised the organizers I was going to make a video for the young people who were going to come for this event. So, but the organizers still thought it was kind of a smart thing to do to put me on the flyer. And then these IPAS people bought tickets, flight tickets, to come to this event from Abuja from Lagos to Abuja, which is about a 1 hour flight. They spent money trying to get to this event, so I was quite happy because yes, they wasted a lot of money, and then they got there, I wasn't even there. So, so I keep telling people, yeah, put me on the poster, and they'll waste all their money. Maybe they run out of the funding finally, but But just to go back to your question, there is a lot of financial interest. It is a pure business model for them. Imagine that the whole African continent, they see it as a whole new market that has not been exploited yet. So Pfizer sees Africa and just sees, oh my goodness, we know if we get in there, that's a whole new market for us. So they are making tons of money out of it in all this, in all of the funding that happens. Normally the people at the top of the food chain for the funding are Western people and Western manufacturers anyway. So if they say they're giving contraceptive, they're not looking for some African pharmaceutical company, they still go to Pfizer. And they get them to go to Africa and provide these services. Planned Parenthood is another organization, Maristos International is another organization. So I think it's a very financial gain, but also ideological gain on some other parts as well, on some other level, because even people who will not gain financially are still pushing, like Western politicians. I don't know if people heard Bernie Sanders, who, I'm so sorry, the American politics is a little bit difficult to talk about these days, but Bernie Sanders was in a debate only last week or about 10 days ago, and he was talking about, funding abortions in Africa. So for him, he doesn't have any financial gain to make, but it's an ideological thing that the idea is spreading even to Africa. It was such an outrageous thing to see, so I think it's on both ends.
I'll stay for a moment with the interest behind some of these cultural attempts at a cultural shift in Africa. And of course, some of this is finance. We could be cynical and skeptical and say, they're just trying to make, these Western powers are just trying to make money off the African market. But well, I've studied in the UK for some time, and I have some good friends who are feminists who actually think that, they sincerely believe, and I think with good intentions, perhaps misinformed, but good intentions, that abortion and contraception are good instruments on how to actually liberate women. They may be misguided, and we could have long conversations about it, but they just sincerely and genuinely believe that. And one of the points where these debates often boil down to is that they say that there's something like a patriarchal structure in the society, and well, maybe contraception has some side effects, and maybe abortion isn't ideal, but it's important to fight the patriarchy with this instrument. Because once we bring down the patriarchy, then perhaps we can deal with all the other bad things, which you also agree are bad with relation to how women are treated in Africa. You spoke about organ mutilation and child marriage and domestic abuse. Whether we are progressives or liberals or conservatives or Christians or atheists, we agree. And these people would say, well, abortion and contraception, it's not ideal, but we need to bring down the patriarchy, and these are good instruments. What would you say to these people who actually mean that argument with a sincere heart?
Yeah, but you cannot bring the patriarchy down by killing of the children. Oh, good for you, men, I will kill your children. A lot of men actually support abortion because of that, right? Because they don't want to take responsibility. I think even the first wave feminists, the original feminists, Alice Paul, women who, Susan B. Anthony, who were fighting for the suffrage, and they were fighting for women's rights to vote. The original feminist movement hated abortion, and data shows that, and literature shows that, and all their writings and things that they said during their time indicated, indeed, that abortion, they believed that abortion was a kind of abuse on women. And even today, it still remains the fact. Now that we've had millions, in fact, billions of abortion, I would say, because every year we have about 40 to 50 million abortions around the world. Now we even know more than they would have known in their time that abortion always leaves behind a lot of regret, a lot of psychological damage. A lot of women who thought they were going to be liberated, and then they came up empty-handed, and not just even empty-handed, damaged in so many ways, be it physical or mental. So it's not liberating to women. It is not freedom for women to always be the ones to be taken to the abortion clinic, the ones to be mutilated. It's a kind of mutilation that affects women and children. No, I don't think that you are actually doing anything to the patriarchy other than strengthening the patriarchy in many ways. People have seen in the West a lot of the men who are a lot of men who are in support of the feminist movement are so much more vociferous about the fact that women have to have that contraception because they like it and they know why they like it. This other approach of having sex linked specifically to responsibility and commitment and all that, it is women who get to gain so much. There is so much to be gained in a culture that insists for you to be able to do what like to live with this woman and have her cooking your meals or whatever. You have to marry her. You don't just come up and I'll just tell you something. That I have some beautiful nieces in Nigeria who are in their 20s. Now you know I'm not in my 20s. I know the secrets, but I have my nieces who are young adults and they're so lovely and everything. And sometimes my mother, my Nigerian mother, who is almost 80 years old, bless her, she stays with them in London. And sometimes all these boys come around to look and kind of visit them and such. And my mother always calls me on the phone and says, I'm not sure this one is ready to be a husband yet, So there is a lot of, in the mind of the older African people, they're constantly thinking, can this person even be responsible for this girl? So, but I think in the West, men gain so much because you see a 14-year-old boy and he already has a girlfriend and, they go on trips together and all of this. The women are the ones who lose so much within this particular dynamic. I just think
so it's a bit more complicated with fighting the patriarchy.
Yeah, so you cannot fight the patriarchy that way.
I see. You mentioned an interesting thing that the first wave feminist movement was actually started by a genuine concern for women, often in Christian circles, for example, in the United States. That's an interesting thing, for example, with human rights as well. Yeah. Just after the Second World War, it was actually Christians who came up with the concept of human rights.
Amnesty International was started up by a Christian.
Right, so this is 70 years ago. It was, so to speak, us founding these organizations. And 70 years later, we have to fight hard for the actual meaning of what it means to be a feminist and what it means to be a proponent of human rights. We have another question from Katka. Katka is asking, what do you ever got a reply back? Whether Barack Obama got in touch and said, Ushu, thank you for getting in touch, I agree with what you say. Probably doesn't happen, does it?
No. Barack Obama has not responded. Melinda Gates did not respond. They usually, I think, just try to ignore. If the optics would look very bad for them to attack me directly, I just think I found that there is a lot of ignoring going on where they just kind of, it's like they don't even acknowledge the things that we are saying or crying out as Africans. So there hasn't really been a response. And I don't expect there to be any response.
I see. So neither Katka asks neither the discussion really gets going. It's more of us saying, or you with your organization saying your things, and then the pro-choice, let's say modern progressive organizations just continuing to do their own things.
Yeah, but we're trying to stop that though. Right. We're hoping for an uprising. Within Africa, people don't agree with them, but it's to how people can get themselves together. You saw those women, I showed their pictures with different signs, is that they should be seen. These women deserve to be seen. If this wasn't abortion they were fighting, somehow BBC will find a way to get the camera, to those issues. Yeah, people talk about racism. And if I'm as an African here today, if I just step out and I make a video crying outside this hall and I say, oh, I'm a black person in Bratislava and I came here and all these white people said bad things to me as an African, oh my goodness, BBC will take a flight here. Okay? They're coming here because it's issue which is so cool to talk about. And if I say, oh, you know, while I was giving my talk in Bratislava, I heard someone say, oh, Nigeria is such a horrible, low place. I could do that, because that's the way I can get BBC to come and CNN, and everybody will be here, and they're all here with their cameras. Then I tell them I'm talking about abortion. No one cares. No one cares about the issue of abortion, the things that we're crying about, even when I talk about it from the African perspective, or not the African perspective. I'm talking about a general idea that the unborn child should be acknowledged as human, should be given human rights, that, you know, like every other human being. If I'm saying that, and if you're saying that, nobody cares about us. And if we are doing it, for example, tomorrow, and somebody spits at us, or pours water on us on the street, or nothing will happen. Maybe the police might be a bit, but no news, no media, nobody is going to say, oh my goodness, did you see what they did to those pro-life people marching in Bratislava? But if somebody spits at me, or even looks at me in a way I don't like, because I think I'm, you know, because I think the person is doing that because I'm black, then I can get the whole world. Even the Prime Minister of Canada will get on the Facebook and he will say something. All right, even though we know what's going on in Canada now. But people are going to be saying, the president of this country is going to come to my aid. She would say, a Nigerian was here, and she didn't get good treatment. But if somebody did that to me because I'm a pro-life person, no, you know, your president will not really be doing anything, will she? So here is what my theory is. Everyone talks about white supremacy. All right, I have traveled to many, many countries. I have been in situations where I'm the only black person. Up to today, I have never personally experienced this thing called white supremacy. But you know what I have experienced in various countries, in various situations, is ideological supremacy. It is where somebody looks down on me, not because I'm black, but because I am pro-life. Because I'm pro-life, and I am pro-responsibility in marriage, you know, and all of these things I talk about. They look down on me for having these ideas and ideologies. That is supremacy. And it's every bit as painful as white supremacy or racism or whatever, right? So this is the kind of discrimination that a lot of us are going through.
And how do you think we can support one another as pro-lifers in Slovakia, in Nigeria, in the UK, in fighting this ideological supremacy? Is it, you know, from very basic things such as sending you a text to say, Uju, I saw that you were ignored today on the media, I was there, I saw it, I care. You know, is it just these small things that matter? Or, of course, we can do brand strategies and organize pro-life marches. Which are the things that you found personally kind of helpful, which gave you encouragement and support in some of these battles?
Yeah, it's gatherings such as this. It's that, you know, we can all come together. That you are pro-life, you don't know what it means to occupy a chair in this hall. That any pro-life speaker, it's not just me, will come here and be speaking, and this is a full hall. Or if there are 5 people, of course, there's a difference between a well-attended event that shows support, that shows that we are not alone. I'm not the only person here who believes this. I might be the only African in this room at this time. But then it doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that. But what I care about is that these beliefs that I am sharing and talking about today, I know that there are so many of us who believe it. So show up at events, you know, be there online and speak out as much as you possibly can on social media. Facebook, if you are on Twitter, I am on Twitter all the time. Sometimes I fight with people on Twitter, so come find me on Twitter. If you're on Instagram, you know, just put out the images and let people know that you are just an ordinary person. There's nothing weird about it. Because sometimes they also like to give this idea that pro-life people are like weirdos. No, you're just a regular person. You're a student or a teacher or a nurse or a mom. Whatever you are, okay? You love movies, you love fashion, you love travel, but you're also pro-life. Okay, so we have all kinds of different interests, you know, classical music, theater, all the nice, cool things that people like. But in addition to all of that, and very importantly, as part of your life, is your belief that human rights should be accorded to even the child in the womb from the moment of conception.
Thank you. It's very kind. One more question, then we'll give some opportunity to ask people on the floor. Our next two questions in Slido essentially ask how can we, people in Slovakia, help to fight some of your battles in Africa? And that, I think, reflects a kind of bigger question, which is that you know, often the pro-life movements are kind of structured along national lines. We have national marches for life, we try to change the legislation nationally, and we work hard for, you know, years and decades, and then in some countries we manage to strike some kind of good law, but then it comes to the international courts, to the international treaties, and in some ways the pro-life battle is much more international and transnational than it has ever been. So do you have any thoughts on this, and how some, I think that's a part of the kind of progressive or modern, postmodern ideology that we are dealing with, which brings some of these policies as a part of it. It's really a kind of international phenomenon, you know. In the past, when, you know, perhaps as Christians, when we had to stood up to other perhaps dangerous ideologies such as communism or fascism, we knew where it was coming from. It was Germany, it was Russia. It was kind of more geographically isolated. But now somehow, you know, we are not Slovak pro-lifers and Nigerian pro-lifers. We are kind of the pro-life international in a way. So would you agree with that? Do you think there's a lot of scope for helping each other internationally?
Absolutely, and that's why I have absolutely no problems coming to Slovakia to speak at a pro-life thing. As you say, it's not really about Africa and, you know, Europe. It is really about us as pro-life people, as one movement. Because again, as you mentioned rightly, there is no real geographic location where it's coming from. Yes, I make some distinctions when I have my presentations, because as of now, Africa remains a territory where we haven't legalized abortion in most of the countries, where the fight, it hasn't even really started in some countries. It has started in some, but not others. So then in that case, there can be a bit of a geographic distinction. The Latin American countries also is in a similar position where they can mark huge regions of collection of countries that don't have legal abortion. So yes, in that case, we can point to the West and say it's coming from there. But other than that, once you are within Western nations, it's all, you know, the fight then becomes one battle. But generally, we can all unite together as the one pro-life movement, international pro-life movement, from whatever country, whatever, you know, religion, whatever non-religion. It is just one pro-life movement. And also, I had wanted to highlight one thing. So I have spoken now in various countries around the world at March for Life campaigns and March for Life rallies. This is going to be my 10th one, and I'm so excited because Slovakia is my 10th, yay! So, and this is in the last 6 years. I've done this in the last 6 years of my life, so it's 14 different marches, 9 different countries. But what strikes me is that whatever country I go to, whatever language they are speaking, whatever race or tribe or tradition they are from, whatever the level of education, people are just horrified by the idea that a child in the womb can be killed. So again, that's how I know that we have this one thing that we are all fighting for. There are many countries in different situations with justice and injustice and all of that, but the one thing that people are fighting, that we have in common, is this fight to promote and have recognized the sanctity of human life, so we can all help one another. And you being Slovakia and the possibility of you helping Africa, particularly with regards to like comprehensive sexuality education and the funding and all of these things going on, yes, you do have a role to play, because obviously your government, yes, you have your agency that deals with development, so you definitely, there is an agency in this country that sends euros to African nations for various projects. It's for yourselves to impress upon your government to never ever get involved in some of these horrible, objectionable projects. But also, you are part of the EU, so you are an important part of this. The EU is now actively, I can tell you, actively funding some bad projects. But you are part of the EU, and I think that your government, if you impress upon your government can then go to the EU and block some of these things from happening, because without consensus, the EU cannot go in and do whatever they like anyway.
There are some interesting insights for our foreign policy, if anybody is interested in foreign policy in Slovakia. So to sum up, like, in a way, the message that we have today is not the workers of the world unite, but the pro-lifers of the world unite. And I would like to give option to our audience to ask 1 or 2 questions in person. If we have somebody courageous enough, we can ask both in Slovak and in English. We'll translate.
If I can figure how to make this thing stick to my ear. I tried it before it worked. But
See if it works.
yeah.
Do we have any volunteers? Anybody wants to ask a question? On the left-hand side, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to ask you, what about the cases of rapes or sexual assaults and the requests for abortion after such experience, or how to treat women which experience this kind of traumatic experience, because it can be, it can have, I would say, many bad circumstances or effects, and so how to deal with this.
Fantastic. So let me address rape, okay? Because especially as a woman as well, it's one of the most horrific things that can happen to anyone. It's one of the things that any woman would be most afraid of at any point in her life, or at nobody wants to ever be in that situation. And those who have been in that situation, it is a horrific, traumatic experience. Yes, that can end up with pregnancy, all right? So the first thing that any woman who has been raped should get from her immediate community, so people who are around her, her family, her friends, and just her colleagues, people who are around her who know what has happened to her, is just an overflowing of love and care. That is a must. So if you know anybody who has been in that situation, always ask yourself, how much more can I love this person? Because what the person needs to start with is this intense amount of love and care, okay? So in addition to that, then there is the question of whether if there was a baby that is conceived, should the woman as part of her care be getting an abortion? Well, that still boils down to the one single question. Is that child, if it was a one-day-old baby that is born, and someone tells you, see, this baby here is the baby that was conceived in rape, so the baby of a rapist. This other baby here is a baby that was conceived in love. Between the two babies that are one-day-old neonates, are you able to kill that child? Or even maybe not killing. Are you able to love that child less as a baby? If you saw somebody carrying a baby, okay? I saw Uriah's baby today and I was trying to cuddle him. He didn't let me. All right. So if I saw a little baby and I want to just hug this little baby, if someone then tells me, oh, this baby was actually conceived in rape, should I be any less loving in the way I hold this child to myself than if it was the child of a known friend, or a known couple that I know that, they love each other and all of that. This is a baby that is so cherished. The answer is no. Okay, so even if we're not going to the extent of killing the child, no, nobody wants to do that. But can you show less love to a child? Are you okay showing less love to a baby, knowing how that child was conceived? So, if the answer is no, then the next question is, that means every baby deserves to be loved. It is terribly, terribly tragic for babies, or for women who conceive babies in rape situations. Whether they conceive or not, it's still a tragic situation. But once that child exists, should we treat that child any different than the baby of this other woman who got married and then conceived a baby and they're rejoicing about it? It's no. The same medical care should be given, the same prenatal care should be given. When the woman is taking care during pregnancy, during delivery, there should be as much care given to that child to make sure that child lives and survives. So if that child deserves the right to life, that means that killing that child makes the child another victim. So this is the second victim of rape. However, what we need to see being discussed in a robust manner is how we can make rape a more punished offense. So let's be talking about adding some years. Okay, so if your penal code says that a man who rapes a person gets 20 years imprisonment, for example, no, I want to see Parliament talking about making it 50 years imprisonment. Okay, because it's a really horrible thing to do. But we're not having a lot of these conversations. I haven't heard much about various parliaments around the world that are talking about making rape a more punished offense, a more egregious offense. But then they are talking about giving the death penalty all the time to the child, and they're always pushing it for the child. So in Africa, in addition to rape, we also have one class of women that you don't have many of in Europe. It's the children conceived in war. So it's children born of war. So during the LRA war in Uganda, there were a lot of women who were raped by soldiers as a weapon of war. So there are these groups of children who exist, today, because such a horrible situation that women were in a war situation and they were raped in war. It is happening in Central African Republic now, It has also happened in Rwanda. So there are babies that were born, so many babies that were born following the Rwandan genocide that were born out of that particular tragedy. But even what we're fighting for now is for governments and societies to treat those children just as well, because the tendency is also for those children to be, discriminated against. We need to see everybody's human rights respected, except the rapists, okay? Except the rapists. Okay, but everybody in this situation should get as much love as they deserve. And children, even children who are conceived in rape, they do deserve love. Thank you.
I'm receiving a lot of nods from the backstage to suggest that this was probably the last question. But let me thank you, Uju, for coming among us to share your thoughts about your work in Africa and beyond internationally. Thank you for also suggesting as to what we could be doing in our foreign policy, in our criminal law policy. And I'm sure you'll be available around if people can want to ask more questions. You will also all be able to hear Uju speak tomorrow on the main stage of the March for Life. You can also look into her book, which was just published last year by Ignatius Press in the United States, which documents and details more of the arguments which she also made in his lecture.
I didn't pay him to do this advert, okay?
No, we just got a forward by my favorite law professor in the United States, so I just had to pull it. So thank you, Uju, for coming to us. I hope you enjoy your second stay in Slovakia, and I'm sure it's the second of many stays. Thank you for coming between us. Yeah.